This house is too much for you, Dad, my son Mark said, his eyes avoiding mine. The glossy brochures for an assisted living facility sat between us on the dining table. A sterile barrier on the wood my wife Eleanor had polished for 47 years. His wife Samantha added, her voice sickly sweet, "It's just practical. The equity, nearly $950,000, would secure all of our futures." I stared at them, the faint scent of Eleanor's gardenias seeming to fade from the room. They saw a house, a number on a balance sheet. They didn't see the place where I had built a life. But they also didn't know about the secret Eleanor had left me, a final gift tucked away in her old cedar chest in the attic. A small lacquered box containing a deed and a key. My escape. A cold clarity washed over me. So I smiled. A calm, steady smile that didn't reach my eyes, and I agreed with everything they said. They thought they had won. They had no idea the real game was just beginning. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about this story in the comments. Before the brochures, before the poison-laced sweetness of Samantha's voice filled these rooms, this house was my sanctuary, not my prison. It was a living, breathing album of my life with Eleanor. Mornings were the quietest, but they were never truly silent. The old house had its own language, the gentle groan of the floorboards as I walked to the kitchen, the sigh of the pipes as the water heater kicked on. I'd make my coffee, the same way I had for 50 years, a simple drip machine, nothing fancy, and take my mug to the living room. I'd sit not in my recliner, but in Eleanor's armchair. It was a deep, burgundy velvet, bought from a downtown furniture store in the autumn of 1978. It cost us $425, which was nearly a full month's salary for me back then at the plant. We paid for it in 3 installments of $141.67, and I remember the pride we felt when we made that final payment. That chair was her throne. It faced the large bay window that looked out onto the front yard, onto the magnificent oak tree we planted when Mark was born. I can still see her there, a book in her lap, her feet tucked beneath her, the afternoon sun creating a halo in her silver hair. The fabric on the arms is worn smooth, a testament to the thousands of hours she spent there. Sometimes, I just sit, my hand resting on that worn spot, and I could almost feel the warmth of her presence, the faint, lingering scent of the gardenia hand lotion she used every single night before bed. It was more than a chair. It was a monument to a shared life, our life. The whole house was like that. Every object held a story. The slight crack in the kitchen window was from a stray baseball Mark hit in the summer of '92. The set of porcelain birds on the mantelpiece were a gift from Eleanor for our 25th anniversary, one for each of our children, Mark and his sister, who we lost too young. Even the air seemed to hold memories. On sunny days, the house smelled of lemon polish and whatever was blooming in Eleanor's garden. On rainy days, it smelled of damp earth and old books. It was the smell of home, a scent I had breathed in for 47 years. It was the smell of safety. My routine was simple, shaped by years of habit and a new, stark reality of grief. After coffee, I'd tend to her garden. I didn't have her green thumb, but I did my best. I'd pull the weeds from around her prize-winning roses and water the hydrangeas that lined the walkway. She'd always said the hydrangeas reminded her of the coast of Maine, where we'd spent our honeymoon in August of 1975. We'd stayed in a little cabin that cost $20 a night, and we thought we were the richest people in the world. In the afternoons, I'd work on small projects in the garage, fixing a loose cabinet hinge or oiling a squeaky door. The methodical work kept my hands busy and my mind from wandering too far into the fog of loss. I remember when Mark and Samantha first got married, 12 years ago. The reception was in this very backyard, under the sprawling branches of that same oak tree. We strung up lights, and Eleanor spent a week baking. She made her famous 3-layer chocolate cake. Samantha, even then, seemed more interested in the house than the celebration. "This property is incredible, Arthur," she'd said to me, swirling a glass of champagne. "The lot size alone, you and Eleanor are sitting on a gold mine." I'd laughed it off at the time, thinking it was just an awkward attempt at conversation. I didn't recognize it for what it was, an appraisal. Eleanor saw it, though. Later that night, as we cleaned up, she'd turned to me, her expression serious. "She sees the price tag, Arthur," she'd whispered. "Not the value." Her words were a quiet warning I didn't fully understand until it was too late. I was too busy seeing my son, happy and in love, to see the calculating gaze of the woman standing beside him. I saw a new daughter. She saw an asset. The change was gradual at first, like the slow turning of leaves in autumn. After the first few weeks of forced sympathy and casserole dishes, Mark and Samantha's visits took on a different texture. They stopped asking how I was feeling and started asking where things were. They weren't helping me grieve. They were taking inventory. The silence in the house, once a heavy blanket of sorrow, now felt charged with a different kind of quiet. The quiet of observation. My quiet. Theirs was the silence of circling predators. I'd sit in Eleanor's armchair, nursing my morning coffee, and watch them. They moved through my home with a sense of ownership that sent a chill down my spine. They were no longer guests. They were assessors. The first real crack appeared on a Saturday afternoon. Samantha stood in the middle of the living room, her hand on her hip. Her eyes narrowed at Eleanor's armchair. "You know, Arthur," she said, her voice bright and brittle, "this chair has seen better days. The velvet is so worn." She ran a manicured finger over the armrest, the same spot my wife's hand had rested for over 40 years. "We should get you something more practical. A nice leather recliner, maybe with heat and massage functions. It would be so much better for your back." I looked from her perfectly polished face to the chair. I saw the ghost of Eleanor, curled up with a book, the afternoon sun in her hair. Samantha saw old fabric. I didn't say anything. I just tightened my grip on my coffee mug, the ceramic warm against my cold hands. Mark, standing by the doorway, just nodded in agreement. "She's right, Dad. It's an idea." He wouldn't look at me. He was already learning to see the world through her eyes. A week later, the annual property tax bill arrived. $8.740 for the year, a figure that always made me catch my breath, but one I had planned for every single time since we paid off the mortgage in 1999. I left it on the kitchen counter, and of course, Samantha saw it. She picked it up as if it were a piece of rotting fruit. "Good heavens, Arthur! This is robbery!" she exclaimed. "How can you possibly manage this on your pension?" Before I could answer, she turned to my son. "Mark, we should handle this. We can set up an automatic payment from our account. It'll be one less thing for your father to worry about." It was a beautiful, sensible, poisonous suggestion. The offer to help was a Trojan horse, and inside it was the power to claim I was incapable. "I've been paying it for 24 years, Samantha," I said, my voice even. "I think I can manage." I saw a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. The first time I had pushed back, however gently, it felt like a small, necessary victory. The slights grew bolder. They started organizing my things without asking. One afternoon, I came downstairs to find Samantha in my study. A small yellow sticky note affixed to the side of my grandfather clock. On it, in her neat, sharp handwriting, was the word Mark. She was tagging my life, piece by piece. She did it under the guise of wanting to know what held sentimental value, but it felt more like she was dividing the spoils before the battle was even over. She'd hold up one of Eleanor's porcelain birds and say, "This is lovely. My mother would adore this." She wasn't admiring the memory. She was rehoming it. My son stood by and let it happen, his silence a constant dull ache in my chest. He was a good boy, my Mark, but he was weak, and Samantha's ambition was a current too strong for him to swim against. I found myself retreating further into my memories of Eleanor, not for comfort, but for clarity. I remembered her warning from that night after their wedding, her voice a soft whisper in the dark of our bedroom. "She sees the price tag, Arthur, not the value." How right she had been. Eleanor had seen the calculator behind Samantha's smile from the very beginning. I had been too blinded by a father's hope to see it. Now, sitting in her chair, I felt the truth of her words settle into my bones. This wasn't just about a house. It was about a lifetime of work, of love, of shared history being weighed against a bank account. And in their eyes, the history was worthless. They didn't understand that the worn velvet of the chair, the crack in the window, the scent of gardenias, that was the value. It was the only thing that mattered. And it was the one thing I would not let them sell. The following Saturday, they brought the real estate agent. Her name was Brenda, a woman with a smile as bright and hard as polished tile. She walked through my home with a clipboard, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors like a countdown timer. Samantha followed a step behind her, nodding eagerly at every suggestion, while Mark trailed them both, looking like a guest at a stranger's party. I sat in Eleanor's armchair, the soft velvet, a small comfort against the sterile invasion. They spoke in clipped, professional tones about neutralizing the space and maximizing curb appeal. Each word felt like an erasure, a careful sanding away of 47 years of life, until nothing but a blank, sellable shell remained. I just listened, my hands resting on the worn arms of the chair, a silent captain on a ship they were determined to scuttle. Brenda finally stopped in the center of the living room, her gaze sweeping over everything before landing, inevitably, on me, and on the chair. "Okay," she said, tapping her pen against her clipboard. "This is a great room. Fantastic natural light from the bay window. But we need to declutter. All the personal photos, the knickknacks on the mantel, they have to be packed away." Samantha nodded vigorously. "Of course. We can get that done this weekend." Then, Brenda's eyes narrowed on my wife's chair. A small, dismissive frown touched her lips. "And this chair," she said, the words sharp and final, "it has to go. It's dated. The color is heavy, and it makes the room feel smaller. It's a complete non-starter for staging." I felt a cold stillness spread through my chest. I looked at the chair, seeing Eleanor with her feet tucked beneath her, the afternoon sun turning her hair to silver. I saw her laughing at something on the television, her hand resting right where mine was now. It wasn't a non-starter. It was the starting point of my entire adult life. Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Well, maybe we could just put it in storage for a bit," he offered, his voice thin. He wouldn't look at me. He was looking at the floor, at the wall, anywhere but at his father. Samantha let out an impatient sigh, a sound like air leaking from a tire. She stepped forward, placing herself between me and the agent, a general taking command of the field. "Mark, be serious. Storage costs money, money we're trying to save. Why would we pay a monthly fee for a piece of junk velvet?" She turned her head slightly, her words aimed at me but spoken for everyone to hear, dripping with a condescending pity that was far more insulting than outright cruelty. "Arthur, I know you're attached to things, but we have to be practical. We need buyers to walk in here and imagine their lives, their future. Not the end of someone else's. The end of someone else's." The words hung in the air, sucking all the warmth from the room. It was the final, brutal truth of how she saw me. I wasn't a person, a father, a grieving husband. I was an ending. A story that was over, its final pages to be ripped out and thrown away to make room for a new one. She wasn't just talking about the chair anymore. She was talking about me. She was talking about Eleanor. My son stood there, silent. His silence was his answer. It was his complicity. In that moment, the deep, aching grief I had carried for months didn't disappear, but it changed. It crystallized into something hard, clear, and cold. It became fuel. I slowly pushed myself up from the armchair. The old springs groaned in protest. I stood tall, my shoulders back, and looked directly at Samantha. I let the silence stretch, watching the confidence in her eyes waver for just a fraction of a second. She expected an argument, tears, a sentimental plea. I would give her none of it. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, steady, and devoid of any emotion she could recognize. "You're absolutely right, Samantha," I said. The surprise on her face was a small, satisfying flicker. "It's time to be practical. The chair goes." I turned my gaze to Brenda. "What's the next step? When do we sign the listing agreement?" Victory washed over Samantha's face, smug and absolute. Mark visibly relaxed, a wave of relief making him sag against the doorframe. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally broken the old man's sentimental attachment to the past. They mistook my surrender for weakness. They didn't understand. I wasn't surrendering the past. I was protecting my future. A future they knew nothing about. A future waiting for me 2 hours north, on the quiet shores of Heron Lake. They had just given me the one thing I needed most, a reason to stop grieving and start fighting. They had drawn the line, and in their arrogance, they had no idea I was about to move it. As the front door clicked shut, the sound echoed in a house that was suddenly, profoundly mine again. The silence that rushed in to fill the space left by their voices was different. It wasn't the heavy, mournful silence of grief I had grown accustomed to. This was a new kind of quiet. It was sharp, clear, and focused. It was the silence of a watchmaker's workshop, the silence before the first piece is set into motion. I stood there in the middle of the living room, my back straight, and for the first time in months, I felt the fog in my head begin to recede, burned away by the cold fire of their condescension. They had made a fatal error in judgment. They saw a feeble old man, lost in his memories, an obstacle to be managed. They had forgotten who I was before I was a widower. They had forgotten I was the man who built this life from nothing. My eyes went to Eleanor's armchair. The sight of it no longer brought a pang of sorrow. The pain had been replaced by a fierce, protective clarity. That chair wasn't a piece of junk velvet. It was a symbol. It was everything they couldn't understand. Loyalty, history, a life built on love, not on equity. In their rush to liquidate my past, they had handed me a cause for my future. They wanted to stage the house to erase my life? Fine. I would stage something far more elaborate. I would stage my own quiet disappearance from their grasp. They thought they were in control. They thought they had finally broken me. It was almost laughable. They would never, ever see this coming. I walked past the chair, my hand brushing the worn velvet not with sadness, but with a silent promise. I went to the small, mahogany writing desk in the corner of the room, the one I'd used to pay bills and write letters for 4 decades. I opened the drawer, the familiar scent of old paper and cedarwood filling the air. I took out a fresh sheet of plain white paper and my old fountain pen, the one Eleanor gave me for my 50th birthday. The weight of it in my hand felt solid, reassuring. I wasn't an emotional, incapable old man. I was a strategist, and my grief had just become my camouflage. I sat down and made a list. My handwriting was steady, the ink a deep, decisive black. 1. Call Mr. Henderson. Monday, 9 a.m. sharp. My lawyer, a man who valued loyalty above all else. 2. Times move Eleanor's box to a bank safe deposit box. The deed and the key to my future at Heron Lake needed to be untouchable. 3. Document every conversation, dates, times, quotes, especially the financial offers. 4. Top cooperate, fully and completely. That last point was the most important. I would be the most agreeable father they could ever wish for. I would nod, I would smile, I would pack boxes. I would let Samantha's ambition and Mark's weakness lead them forward, deeper and deeper into their own trap. I would let them believe they were managing my decline, while I was orchestrating their downfall. Every action they took, every greedy suggestion they made, from this point on, would not be an insult. It would be evidence. They wanted to talk about practicality? I was about to give them a lesson in the practical consequences of betrayal. The fight for my life, for Eleanor's memory, had begun. And it would be fought, not with shouting and anger, but with silence, patience, and a single, perfectly timed move. The first phone call I made was on Monday morning at 9:01 a.m. I let the phone ring twice before Mr. Henderson picked up, his voice the same gravelly baritone I'd known for 30 years. Henderson Law. He answered. No receptionist, no frills. That was Robert Henderson. He'd handled the legal work for my small engine repair side business back in the 80s, and later, he'd drafted our wills. He was a man who understood that a contract was more than paper, it was a promise. Robert, it's Arthur Miller, I said. There was a short pause. Arthur, I was so sorry to hear about Eleanor. A fine woman. I thanked him, then got straight to the point. I need to see you, Robert. It's about my estate. Something has come up. He didn't ask questions. My 10 o'clock canceled. Can you be here by then? An hour later, I was sitting in a worn leather chair across from his massive oak desk, a desk cluttered with neat stacks of paper and law books. I explained everything. I didn't editorialize or complain. I just laid out the facts. The conversation about the assisted living facility, the talk of selling the house, the exact phrase Samantha had used, the end of someone else's. I even told him about the overheard conversation, their plan to declare me legally incompetent. The only thing I kept to myself was the cottage on Heron Lake. That was my ace, and I wasn't ready to play it. Robert listened without interruption, his steepled fingers resting beneath his chin. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on a framed photo of his own late wife. "Greed," he finally said, his voice low and full of disgust. "It's a cancer, Arthur. It eats families from the inside out." He leaned forward. "All business now. They can't declare you incompetent without a medical and psychiatric evaluation, which you would pass with flying colors. But they can make your life a living hell trying. They can file petitions, force hearings. It's a war of attrition. We need to act first, quietly and decisively." He laid out a plan. Not a plan of attack, but of defense. A fortress of paper. He suggested a revocable living trust. "We'll call it the Arthur and Eleanor Miller Trust," he said, a small, sad smile on his lips. "We transfer the house into the trust immediately. You will be the sole trustee. You retain full control. But legally, the property is no longer held by Arthur Miller, the individual. It makes it infinitely harder for anyone to force a sale or claim you can't manage it. The cost for his services would be a flat fee of $2,500. It was a lot of money, but it felt like the best investment I'd ever make. I agreed on the spot. I left his office feeling lighter than I had in months, armed with a purpose. My next stop was the First National Bank downtown. The air inside was cool and smelled of clean money and faint disinfectant. I walked up to the counter and asked to open a safe deposit box. A young woman led me down to the vault, its massive, circular steel door standing open like a silent sentinel. She showed me a small box, 3 inches by 5 inches. "This one is $120 for the year," she said cheerfully. It was perfect. I signed the paperwork, paid in cash, and she handed me 2 small, identical brass keys. I took one and left the other in the envelope. Alone in the small private viewing room, I took the lacquered box from my coat pocket. I opened it one last time, looking at the deed for the Heron Lake cottage and the heavy key that belonged to its front door. This was Eleanor's final, secret act of love. Her foresight was my lifeline. I placed the box inside the metal container, closed the lid, and slid it into its slot in the wall. The sound of the lock clicking shut was one of the most satisfying sounds I had ever heard. My escape was now secure, beyond their reach, beyond anyone's. That evening, they came over, their faces bright with the thrill of their victory. They brought 3 dozen flattened cardboard boxes. "We can start with the little things, Dad," Mark said, his enthusiasm forced. Samantha was in her element, directing the operation. "Let's begin in the study. All those old books and papers. We can sort them into keep, donate, and trash." She picked up one of Eleanor's gardening journals from my desk. "What about these? There are dozens of them. We could probably sell them online to a collector. People buy things like this." I felt a flash of hot anger, the thought of a stranger's hands on my wife's private thoughts, but I pushed it down, replacing it with a cold, smooth mask of compliance. "That's a good idea, Samantha. Very practical," I said, my voice even. "You handle it. You know best." Her smile was triumphant. She mistook my acquiescence for defeat. I watched them for an hour as they taped up boxes, labeling them with a thick black marker. They were so busy clearing out my life they never once noticed the quiet resolve in my eyes. They never noticed I was taking my own inventory. Over the next 2 weeks I became the model of cooperation. I packed alongside them, nodding at their suggestions, never once arguing when they labeled a box of precious memories as donations. But my real work happened when they were gone. On October 23rd, Mr. Henderson's paralegal came to the house with the trust documents. I signed them at the dining room table, the same table where my son had tried to sell my future. The house was now shielded. Then, I began my own quiet evacuation. I rented a small 5-by-5-foot storage unit across town for $55 a month, paying for a year in advance in cash. Every night, after they left, I would go through the boxes they'd packed. I'd carefully remove the things that truly mattered, Eleanor's journals, our wedding album, the box of letters we wrote to each other when I was stationed overseas, the kids, first-grade drawings. I repacked them into plain boxes I'd bought myself and, one or two at a time, loaded them into the trunk of my car. The next day, I dropped them off at the storage unit. To them, the house was emptying out. In reality, I was curating my life, saving its soul while they prepared to sell its shell. The listing agreement felt surprisingly light in my hands, a few flimsy pages that held the weight of my entire life. Brenda, the real estate agent, had laid it out on the dining table with a practiced flourish. "We'll list it at $949, $900, she announced, her voice full of professional optimism. "It's an aggressive price point designed to attract multiple offers. In this market, we could see a bidding war." Samantha, standing behind her, practically vibrated with excitement. "That's wonderful, Brenda. Just wonderful." I picked up the pen. I didn't read the fine print. I didn't need to. My lawyer, Robert Henderson, had already reviewed a copy I'd sent him. My signature was steady as I signed my name on the line, right next to the printed title, Arthur Miller, Trustee. Neither Brenda nor Samantha noticed the addition. They were too focused on the $900,000 figure. I pushed the papers back across the table. "Whatever you think is best," I said, my voice placid. Mark, who had been lingering by the kitchen door, gave me a small, grateful smile. He thought I was finally letting go. He had no idea I was just tightening my grip. The next phase was what Samantha called the Great Neutralization. It was a full-scale invasion of beige. She arrived the next day with paint swatches, fabric samples, and a contractor named Dave who looked. The contractor, Dave, and his crew descended on my home like a swarm of locusts in beige uniforms. They worked with an impersonal efficiency that was chilling. Eleanor's warm, butter-yellow kitchen was painted a sterile, lifeless gray they called greige. The floral wallpaper in our bedroom, the one she'd picked out in the spring of '95, was stripped away and replaced with flat, off-white paint. Every personal photograph was taken down, every knick-knack packed away into boxes labeled MISC and stacked in the garage. They even took down the porcelain birds from the mantelpiece. The house was being systematically lobotomized, its memories scrubbed clean. The hardest day was when they came for Eleanor's armchair. I stood by the window and watched two of Dave's young men haul it out to the curb for a bulk trash pickup. The deep burgundy velvet looked faded and sad under the harsh midday sun. I saw them struggle with its weight, and I thought, they have no idea what they're carrying. They were just carting away a piece of old furniture, not the throne from which a queen had quietly ruled her happy kingdom for 42 years. I didn't protest. I just watched until the truck came, and it was gone. That empty space in the living room became a hole in the house itself, a vacuum where all the warmth used to be. Samantha was thrilled. "It looks so much bigger now," she'd chirped, clapping her hands together. "So much more potential." The for sale sign went up on the lawn on November 1st. Brenda, the agent, held open houses every weekend. A steady stream of strangers walked through the hollowed-out rooms, their shoes clicking on the hardwood floors. They'd open closets and peer into cabinets, their faces unreadable. Samantha grew more and more tense with each passing day that didn't bring a full-price offer. She called me every other evening for an update, but her questions were always the same. Did Brilling call? Any second showings? Someone must have put in an offer by now. The initial aggressive price of $949, $900, had created interest but no commitments. Brenda advised a price drop to $925,000. Samantha resisted at first, her voice tight with frustration over the phone. "It's that old plumbing," she'd snap. "Or the outdated electrical. We should have paid to have that fixed." She was looking for something, anything to blame. The breaking point came 3 weeks after the sign went up. It arrived in a plain white envelope from the county clerk's office. It was a standard confirmation letter, officially recording the property's title transfer to the Arthur and Eleanor Miller Trust. I had left it on the new, brutally minimalist glass coffee table that Samantha had insisted on buying for the staging. She saw it the moment she walked in the door that evening, dropping her purse on the floor to snatch it up. Mark trailed in behind her, looking tired. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp. She wasn't asking a question. She was making an accusation. She waved the letter in my face. The Arthur and Eleanor Miller Trust. What is this, Arthur? When did you do this? I remained seated on the stiff, uncomfortable gray sofa that had replaced our comfortable old one. I looked from her furious face to my son, who just stared at the floor. A few weeks ago, I answered calmly. Robert Henderson handled it. It's a revocable living trust. A trust? She practically shrieked, the words sounding like a profanity on her lips. Why would you put the house in a trust without telling us? You're making everything more complicated. Are you trying to sabotage this sale? Mark finally looked up. Dad, we don't understand. This seems like a big step to take on your own. His voice was pleading, but it was weak, drowned out by his wife's fury. I took a slow breath, keeping my own voice perfectly level. Samantha, you've been telling me for months that we need to be practical, that we need to protect the assets. This is the most practical, legally sound way to manage an estate of this value. My lawyer advised it was the responsible thing to do. It protects the property from probate court and legal challenges. It simplifies things in the long run. I let the word simplifies hang in the air. Her face was a mask of disbelief. Simplifies? It's another layer of legal nonsense. Buyers will be scared off. Actually, they won't, I countered, my tone still conversational. I asked Robert specifically. Brenda confirmed it. For a buyer, it makes no difference. The trustee, in this case, me, has the full legal authority to sign all the closing documents. It's a standard procedure. The fact that I had already checked with her own agent seemed to stun her into a momentary silence. Her anger, finding no purchase on me, began to curdle into desperation. We don't have time for standard procedures, she burst out, her voice cracking. Do you have any idea what this is costing us? Dave's final bill for the staging, the paint, the new lights, getting rid of all that junk, was $12. $500. We paid it. We put it on our credit card, assuming this house would be sold by now. We have payments to make, Arthur. We were counting on this. There it was. The raw, ugly truth, finally laid bare. It wasn't about my welfare. It had never been about what was practical for me. It was about their credit card bill. It was about their plans, their assumptions, their greed. I looked at her, at my son, who stood beside her, his face pale with shame, and I felt nothing but a cold, clear pity. I leaned forward slightly, my hands resting on my knees. That was your decision, Samantha, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You chose the contractor. You approved the work. You spent the money. I was never sent an invoice. I was never asked to pay. You told me not to worry about a thing, that you would handle it all. I am simply following the plan that you and Mark laid out for me. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. She had lost control of the narrative. I was no longer the confused, sentimental old man. I was a man who listened, who remembered, and who followed instructions to the letter. Her own instructions. Defeated, she let the letter from the county clerk flutter from her fingers onto the glass table. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the house, slamming the front door so hard the new, minimalist vase on the mantelpiece rattled. Mark stood there for a moment, caught in the wreckage. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then just shook his head and followed his wife out into the cold November evening. The silence he left behind was the sound of my victory. The final meeting was held in the hollowed-out living room. It felt like a sterile boardroom, not the heart of my home. The air was thick with a tense, expectant silence. Brenda, the agent, sat on one side of the glass coffee table, a file open in front of her. Samantha and Mark sat on the stiff gray sofa opposite me. Samantha's leg bounced with a nervous energy, the only movement in the room. I sat where Eleanor's armchair used to be, on a hard, modern chair that felt alien beneath me. The empty space felt like a silent witness to the proceedings. Brenda cleared her throat. Okay, she began, her professional smile looking strained. We have an offer. It's from a young couple, pre-approved, no contingencies. They're offering $895,000. Samantha let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for weeks. It wasn't the number she wanted, but it was a lifeline. It's a solid offer, Brenda continued, trying to sell it. In the current market, given the age of the home's systems, I think it's a very fair number. Samantha looked at me, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "We'll take it," she said, not even consulting me. She nudged Mark, who nodded dumbly. "Yes, Dad. It's a good offer. We should take it." Brenda slid the purchase agreement and a pen across the glass table toward me. "You just need to sign here, Arthur, as trustee." All their eyes were on me. The entire future they had planned for themselves rested on the tip of that cheap plastic pen. I looked down at the paper, at the cold, black letters spelling out a number that was supposed to represent the sum total of my life with Eleanor. I saw the kitchen where she'd taught Mark to bake cookies. I saw the backyard where we'd hosted his 5th birthday party. I saw the bay window where her ghost still sat in the afternoon sun. I thought of the $12, $500 they'd spent on paint and light fixtures, a debt they expected me to pay with my memories. I looked up, past them, to the empty spot on the mantelpiece where the porcelain birds used to be. Then I met Samantha's impatient gaze. My hand moved, but not to the pen. I placed my palm flat on the contract, and slowly, deliberately, slid it back across the table to Brenda. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a slammed door. Brenda blinked, confused. Mark's head snapped up. Samantha's face, which had been alight with triumph, contorted into a mask of disbelief. "What?" she breathed. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no," I repeated, my voice calm and steady. "I'm not selling my house." The dam of her composure broke. She shot to her feet, her face turning a blotchy red. "You can't do this," she screamed, her voice echoing in the empty staged room. "We have an offer. A good offer. We've spent weeks on this, months. We spent our own money. We have a bill for $12, $500, because you agreed to this." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You let us on. You let us do all this work, spend all this money for what? To change your mind at the last second? Are you senile? Is that it?" Mark jumped up, grabbing her arm. "Sam, calm down." "No," she shrieked, shaking him off. "I will not calm down. He owes us. We did this for him, to secure his future, and this is how he repays us? We'll see you in court, Arthur. We'll get that money back. We will prove you are not fit to make these decisions." I let her tirade wash over me, the ugly words confirming everything I already knew. I waited until she was gasping for breath, her chest heaving, before I spoke. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "I owe you nothing, Samantha," I said, my words precise and cold. "The money you spent was a business expense. You made a bad investment. You gambled that you could cash in on my grief, and you lost." I turned my gaze to my son, who stood frozen, his face a canvas of shame. "And you, Mark. You stood by and watched her tag my life for sale. You let her call your mother's possessions junk. You let this happen." I stood up, and for the first time I felt taller than both of them. "You were right about one thing. This house is too much for me now. But it isn't an asset to be liquidated. It is the home my wife and I built. It is a legacy of love, not a solution to your credit card debt." I let that sink in. I saw the fight drain from Samantha's eyes, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. They had miscalculated completely. "You wanted to talk to a lawyer about my finances," I continued, my voice low. "You whispered in my kitchen about having me declared incompetent. I heard you, so I decided to make a sound decision, the soundest decision of my life. I took a step toward them, and they both instinctively took a step back. You see, Eleanor knew. She saw the calculator in your eyes, Samantha, years ago. And she made a plan. A practical plan. She left me a future you know nothing about. She bought me a house, years ago. A small cottage, on a lake, paid in full. A place that is quiet and peaceful and entirely mine. A place you will never be invited to, and a place you will never, ever touch." The finality of it hit them. It was a checkmate they never saw coming. Samantha's face went pale, her mouth slightly agape. Mark finally looked at me, his eyes swimming with a pathetic, useless regret. They had lost. It was over. "Brenda," I said, turning to the stunned real estate agent. "The listing is terminated, effective immediately. Please have your sign removed from my lawn by the end of the day." I then turned back to my son and his wife. "Get your things," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. The gray sofa, the glass table, the soulless art. I want it all gone. And take your boxes of donations with you. I'll handle my wife's memories myself. I walked over to the wall and picked up the only personal item they had missed, a small, framed photo of Eleanor and me on our wedding day that I had hidden in a drawer. I held it in my hand, the cool glass a comfort. "Now, please leave my house." The silence that fell after the front door closed behind them was not the heavy, mournful silence of grief I had lived with for months. It was a clean silence. A clear silence. It was the sound of the house taking its first deep, untroubled breath. I stood in the middle of the living room, in the sterile beige world Samantha had created, and I felt a profound sense of release. The battle was over. My home, stripped of its soul, was finally mine to reclaim. The next morning, I made a call. Not to a lawyer, but to the contractor, Dave. "I have a removal job for you," I said, my voice firm. "I want every piece of staging furniture, every gray cushion, every soulless piece of art out of my house by noon. I'll pay your crew double your usual rate for the inconvenience." He was there in an hour. Watching them carry out the brutally modern sofa and the cold glass table felt like an exorcism. Piece by piece, Samantha's ambition was being hauled out to the curb. When the last item was gone, I paid Dave's men in cash, $800 for 2 hours of work. It was the most satisfying check I'd ever written. The house was empty now, a blank canvas. But it was Niwa Senjib, my $4 canvas. That afternoon, I drove to the storage unit. I opened the door and was greeted by the familiar sight of my own boxes, the ones I had secretly packed. I started with the most important one, the box containing our wedding album and Eleanor's gardening journals. Back at home, I placed them on the mantelpiece, right where the porcelain birds used to be. It was the first stroke of color on the blank canvas. For days I worked, slowly and methodically. I brought my life back from exile. Box by box, I hung the photographs back on the walls. I put my old, comfortable reading lamp beside the empty space where her armchair once stood. But I couldn't fill that space. It was a wound that refused to close. I knew I couldn't bring her chair back, and I realized I didn't want to. To try and replicate it would be to live in the past. Eleanor hadn't wanted me to live in the past. She had bought me a future. So, one Tuesday, I drove downtown to the old furniture store, the same one where we'd bought her chair back in 1978. I walked through the aisles until I saw it. It wasn't burgundy velvet. It was a simple, elegant armchair, upholstered in a deep forest green leather, with strong, dark wood arms. It was sturdy. It was for me. The chair was delivered the next day. It cost me $1, $150, and I paid for it in full. I placed it in the exact same spot by the bay window, facing the oak tree. That evening, I made my coffee and sat down in it for the first time. The leather was cool and smooth, smelling faintly of polish and new beginnings. I rested my hand on the wooden armrest, and I looked out at the fading light. I wasn't trying to feel Eleanor's presence anymore. I didn't need to. Her love wasn't a ghost in a worn-out chair. It was the foundation I was building this new life on. It was the deed in the safe deposit box. It was the strength that had allowed me to say no. The house was no longer a mausoleum of memories. It was my headquarters. And soon, when I was ready, I would pack a single bag, lock the front door, and drive north to Heron Lake. Not as a man running from grief, but as a man walking toward a sunrise Eleanor had painted for me. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life. It's been 3 months since that final confrontation. The silence in this house has changed its character completely. It's no longer the heavy echo of loss. It's the clean, quiet sound of peace. Sitting here in my new leather chair, the one I chose for myself, I've had a lot of time to reflect. I finally understood the last lesson Eleanor left for me. A lesson more valuable than any deed or key. You must never confuse price with value. My son and his wife saw a number, an impressive one, $950,000. They saw a transaction, a quick fix for their finances, and a launch pad for their ambitions. They looked right through the 47 years of life lived within these walls, blind to the invisible architecture of love and memory that made this place a home, not a property. They mistook my grief for weakness and my sentiment for senility. They believed my memories were chains holding me to the past, but they were wrong. Those memories were my armor. They gave me the clarity and the strength to protect my own dignity when those closest to me would not. True wealth isn't something you can liquidate. It's the respect you command for yourself. It's the legacy of love you choose to honor. And it's the quiet courage to refuse to be erased from your own story. Never let anyone convince you that your life is just an asset to be sold. Your history is your strength, and your dignity is the one thing that is truly priceless. If you like this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life.